Welcome to the Hyphen, Indian American Dialogues. I'm your host, Sital Kalantry. I'm a law professor and author and founder of several clinics and centers at universities. The title of today's episodes, Should Indian Americans Lobby the U.S. Government for the Benefit of India, exposes the diversity of the Indian community and the many challenges we face in reaching a political consensus. Recently, Member of Parliament Shashi Tharoor chastised Indian Americans for failing to aggressively lobby on behalf of India. He said that he had recently met Indian American members of Congress, and they told him that they hadn't received even one phone call from Indian Americans given the tensions between India and the US right now. Let's hear what he said about this.
If you care about the relationship with your motherland, then you also have to fight for it, speak for it, and make more of an effort to press your political representatives to stand up for India.
Joining me today is Kapil Sharma, someone who's been working on the U.S.-India relations at the highest levels for decades. Kapil has held senior government positions in the U.S. government. He's worked also directly on Capitol Hill, and he continues to develop projects that build bridges between the two countries. He's fondly known in Washington, D.C. as Cap. So, Cap, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Sital. Very excited to be here with you today.
So am I. So you responded almost immediately to MP Tharoor's remarks on Twitter, pointing out the many ways in which Indian Americans have actually shaped U.S. policy towards India. You've lived this work. You've seen it from the inside. So tell us, what does Tharoor miss?
So I love Shashi, and I think generally he's spot on, and his foreign policy views are good. In this particular case, I think he was really off. What he did was he took the quote or an interaction from one congresswoman who is based out of Texas, who just got elected into Congress. And when they talked about the relationship with Indian Americans in the diaspora, she said that she doesn't hear that much from her constituents. Well, she's only been in Congress for 9 months, and I'm not sure what her relationship with the constituency is. I know that this congresswoman has a significant number of Indian Americans, about 20,000 Indian Americans in her district, but it takes time for a community or a diaspora to establish that relationship. So that's the first thing. And he took that one interaction with that one congresswoman and he applied it to the whole diaspora. And it made it seem like that the diaspora is not involved, and it actually made members of our diaspora sound defensive. So I took issue to that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point in terms of the factual reference that Shashi Tharoor had to make his comments that Indian Americans haven't been active, coming, from a limited source, is super interesting because in fact they have, and there's so much engagement that the U.S. Indian Americans had done, particularly to the U.S. India nuclear deal. You've for decades have been involved in shaping U.S. India policy, and he's a brilliant man. He's a global citizen, former UN official, youngest person to get a PhD at Tufts, and I've met him several times. I think he's a delight. But what I think he does, his comment has put us on the defensive, but also has raised issues about the limited view of Indian Americans in India, but also exposed some rifts in our community, which I'll talk about. Despite the initial fact that reliance that he had in a few statements by congresspeople, he then went on to publish an op-ed acknowledging that the issue is more complicated than he first noted, right? He concedes that, look, Indian Americans can't be seen as lobbying for India because they might be perceived to be disloyal if they advocate for a foreign government. He recognized that U.S.-born Indian Americans may not feel a strong pull towards India. And he also recognized that, look, not all Indian Americans agree with India's policies and may support what Trump is trying to do for America. Yet, even while acknowledging all this, ultimately he stood by his position. He said, he ends his op-ed with, he argues that if U.S. tariffs hurt Indian exporters, if visa fees harm Indian workers, and if sanctions complicate India's autonomy, quote, then silence is complicity. Along this lines, he also drew the comparison to the Jewish American community. As you know, their political power is intense, largely through the APAC, which is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. They influence U.S. policy on Israel. And I think here's where it gets interesting, right? Given your experience, what do you think about this comparison? Is it a fair one? And if not, why is it problematic?
Oh, well, I want to take one step back to your comment. I agree with you. I don't understand what is it that people in India want to see. Do they want to see Indian Americans protesting? Do they want to see them jumping up and down? Do they want to see them writing op-eds? What is it that what would he like to see Indian Americans do? There's tons and much more efficient ways of showing support for India and the US bilateral than just simply being very loud. You still had about a dozen members of Congress go to India this year. You had about four governors go to India this year. And then you had about 11 to 12 chiefs of staff of major committees in Congress go to India. These are people who are going because either for governors, their constituencies are asking them to go. They know it's important to go to India. Probably companies are investing majorly in their states. The congressmen that went, I know for a fact, have large diaspora in their constituencies. And chiefs of staff, why would chiefs of staff of congressional offices go? It's because their diaspora is probably asking them or wanting them to go. And what better way to engage and understand and learn about India than by going to India? Oh, I should add, there were 9 resolutions and hearings on India in the U.S. Congress this year. All of them were relatively positive. So it's easy for Shashi or Dr. Tharoor to make that comment. But if I look broader and if I think of the US India relationship being bigger, better, and stronger than what just Trump says, I actually think that the diaspora has been quite active and people like congressmen and governors and state legislators are responding to that.
So, Kapil, what do you think about the comparison between Indian Americans and Jewish Americans vis-a-vis how we can impact foreign policy of the U.S.?
Sital, it's a great question, and it's something that I've thought about a lot over the last 20 years, 25 years since I've been working on Capitol Hill. And even when I first started working in 1991 for Frank Pallone, there were conversations about how can we be more like the Jewish American lobby. I came to the conclusion that we're not comparing apples to apples. We're not even comparing apples to oranges. Maybe we're comparing peanuts to apples. And the reason being is that I don't think people within our community appreciate how engaged, both politically and civically, the Jewish community is in the United States. I'll put a simple fact to you. About 15 to 20 years ago, Sital, how many do you think Jewish or Jewish affiliated public hospitals there were in the United States?
I have no idea.
113.
Okay.
Having about 15 to 20, 25,000 beds. Now, let me ask you this. How many Indian American public hospitals are there?
Zero, that as far as I know.
Zero. Now, if I think, and now actually it's really interesting about healthcare in America, that number of 113 is now down to about 25, just mergers, acquisitions. But the more fascinating thing about that is that if you have a public hospital in the United States, that means that you're working with legislators, thought leaders, you're getting public financing, you're engaging. And not only that, you're broadening your engagement with thought leaders when you're doing a public hospital. How many community centers would you say, like the JCCs? 400.
Yeah.
How many do you think of Indian Americans, similar like to a JCC, that is known to legislators or policy people, or there's a database of it, do we have from our community? They have invested so much in the civic side of their community. The reason why this is so important is that it enables an understanding and an openness of the culture. But I have a few more statistics that I researched on, to kind of put this, why I feel like comparing the two communities isn't really fair to either community. Indian Americans are still, when it comes from a population perspective, about half the size of the Jewish American community. This is the most important fact when I come to thinking about the Jewish diaspora versus the Indian American diaspora. 71% of the Indian diaspora is Jewish. I mean, is foreign born. Less than 10% of the Jewish community is foreign born right now in the United States. And that is, I think, a fairly significant statistics when you're thinking about how do people within the Jewish American community identify and talk to members of Congress. Education, relatively the same. Income, Indian Americans are the highest, but the Jewish community is not that far behind. But here's another interesting statistic when you think about it, that the Jewish demographic profile is far older than the Indian American profile. So what it means to me is that they have longer or more established roots in the United States. And then here is what I think is the biggest difference between our two communities. By religion, about 5.8 million Jewish Americans consider themselves connected by religion, and 1.7 by culture, which makes up their over 7 million. Whereas most Indian Americans still continue to identify themselves by region of India, not by religion, not even by culture, but by region. And so what I feel happens is this asks two big questions. What does it mean to be Indian American? And two, what are the unifying factors? I think that it's easier for the Jewish American community to unify around faith than it is for our community. So when it comes to mobilizing or to having a voice, while the Jewish American community is very diverse, they have very diverse voices, it is still easier for them to connect politically than it is for our own community. So I think it is far harder for us to be like the Jewish American community, and we should stop comparing ourselves. And I would say this to Shashi as well.
That's, yes, incredible. And you've raised, I think, multiple issues, but two issues that I want to tweeze out, right? One issue that you pointed out is that Jewish Americans have been here longer and have made more of an effort to kind of branch out. And I don't mean like assimilation, but I mean doing more cultural integration, sharing themselves, probably donating more, with doing their philanthropy in America, right? So their roots are deeper into this country. But the second issue is then how do we come together, have consensus on anything, given how disparate we are, right? We are religiously disparate, we are regionally disparate, and we value region as much as we do anything else. And so we're not even integrated together. And I think that's the other issue you've raised. And the third is the interesting one about the foreign born and the domestic born, right? I think that cuts both ways. Even though there are more of Indian Americans that are foreign born than there are U.S. born, it's about actually almost even. But the U.S. born Indian Americans are less likely to care about the state of India and what happens to India and the future of India. They may have cultural affiliations to it. They may love to go and eat the food and dance the dances, but perhaps aren't as motivated. It's the foreign born that are more loyal, and they want India to succeed. They feel more nationalistic towards India, whereas American born Indians are more likely to feel that this is their nation and this is their country. So multiple factors, I think.
If you want to go into domestic issues as well, and talk about that, because I find that the Jewish American community also has a lot of groups that work on domestic issues and not necessarily attack each other either, right? I think there's an acknowledgement that there is different viewpoints within the Jewish community. And so what ends up happening is that for some reason, our community, our diaspora, really fights hard between the two different parties. And I think that is what leads to this confusion of what it means to be Indian American. And if we don't have somewhat of an identity politically, how are we able to advocate for issues if we ourselves can't come to a common definition?
Yeah, I think, and you're raising another point, which is where the comparison breaks down, is that Jewish American community has, while they have differences of opinion, even about Israel, I think they have largely forged consensus among each other, and where we haven't. But I think part of that also comes from the nature of the ethnic groups, right? I mean, the Israel people who support it are largely Jewish American. Our diaspora is Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, Christians, Jains. So there isn't a unified governance of within the community. And we also are regionally biased in some ways, and so making it hard for us to come together. We're highly partisan, as you say. We are. It's changing a little bit. This election cycle became more Republican, but we tend to be Democrat and hold certain progressive values. And we don't necessarily kind of reach across the aisle and respect one another's values when they may disagree with us. So I think all of those things, when we're disunited domestically, we are not able to impact foreign policy. Moreover, there's a disagreement about India, right? India, the way in which its government has been operating for the last decade or so, there may not be an agreement about having it based on certain values, based on denying rights to certain people, freedom of speech. So that also prevents us from we have inherent problems in coming together. Two, we may not even agree about what India's policy should be and whether we support that, whether we should support the government.
But that doesn't mean that we can't still come to agreement that a strong U.S. India partnership or relationship is important. It's important for the future of the U.S. It's important for the future of India. And a strong U.S. India relationship is just good for the world.
Well, I want to talk about your observation about sort of growing up in the 80s like I did in the US. Since that time, people have come who have been in other professions, not the doctors, not the accountants, not the engineers. We have people who are blue collar workers. We have taxi drivers. We have truck drivers. We have undocumented people. And then then we have the high level tech workers who've also come at the same time. And so, I mean, if we look at it, makes sense why we have an identity crisis. If we look at just the data, 5.2 million people identify as Indian alone or in combination. And of those, around 3.4 are US citizens. And breaking that down, 1.7 are US born and 1.6 are foreign born. So, and then on top of that, there's some large number of undocumented, right? We've seen all of the things that are having with truck drivers who are running, having these major accidents. So there's a lot of invisible undocumented. But whereas when I think we're growing up, we were ABCDs, American born confused Desis, because it was our parents' generation who are from India and then us. But now there's this new foreign born people who are coming in from the tech industry who are very connected to India, right? They're super, super connected and continue to connect because of the social media, of the communication channels. So I think that's where why there's so many fractures. One of the explanations for there being so many fractures.
You're one of the few people that I have met in the last, let's say, 5, 6, 7 years that even acknowledges that our community is made up of taxi cab drivers, 7-Eleven workers, there is a huge segment of our community that is not the CEOs. I have a book here. Look at this. I'll show it to you. This book right here, and it says Indian Genius, and it's got pictures of all of these famous people on there. And I think to myself, what are we saying about our community, and what we represent in the United States? When I think about when I go to New York City, when I go to San Francisco, there are Uber drivers, there are taxi cab drivers, there are service workers, there are people who are not the CEOs, they're not the wealthy, and they can't identify or share our experience, let alone our political voice. And so I'm glad you brought that up. I think it is a big part of our political problems and our political identity problems, and we need to figure out and find ways of redefining ourselves politically. That we're more than just a Google CEO. We're more than just high tech workers. We're a very diverse community. We're in all income spectrums, all income streams, and when we say we're Indian American, we really have to broaden that definition to be as inclusive. Right now, I feel like our political definition of Indian American, is very exclusive.
Agreed. There's a generational diversity. There's a documented status diversity. There's a when you came from India, even within the foreign born, there's the foreign born like my parents that came in 1972, U.S. citizen, and then there are the foreign born U.S. citizens that maybe came, 5-10 years ago, and were lucky enough to convert their green card into U.S. citizenship. So there's a lot of work to be done, and in bringing this community together. And I know you, in particular, have been working a lot on doing that, as well as on building U.S. India foreign relationships with Sunny, and the Round Glass Foundation is your latest initiative. So could you talk a little bit about that and what you personally are doing to deepen this understanding and cooperation between India and the U.S.?
Thanks. And again, I just want to reiterate, thank you for acknowledging the disparity within our community, the diversity. Actually, that's probably a better word. I'm proud to be working with the Round Glass Foundation and with Sunny Singh, and Sunny has become a visionary in what the Round Glass Foundation is trying to do. There are kind of three buckets that we're focusing on, and I think they actually capture a lot of our conversation. So the Global India Collective and Round Glass Foundation is trying to do work in academics and arts. People like you, like professors and academics, you actually shape the way that a lot of young people may think about any issue. I mean, for you, you're one of the top law professors in the country. So legally speaking, right, you have a huge impact as to how young lawyers may think about the law. Well, the same thing comes about with India. And all the great work you're doing at the India Center in Seattle University with young people, you can actually shape the way that they think about and engage India. And it may not necessarily be through a coursework, but it can be through the way that they see Indian art, the way they see Indian performances, the way they talk about issues. I know you raise a lot of issues about gender in India, and so and the law, and I think it's great. And I think what it does is that you expand the way people think and talk about India, and that's one of the platforms that the Global India Collective and Round Glass are really interested in doing. How do we create more platforms that you've created, and almost take what you've done and say, how do we replicate this throughout the country? Because of some of the really groundbreaking, interesting work that you do. And so we really, at the Round Glass Foundation and Global India Collective, are really trying to find ways of promoting and talking about India's soft power in a broader way. And that's, a lot of that through arts. Then we've created platforms to think about and talk about how do thought leaders think about India, and how do they engage India. I think one of the cool things about What we're doing at the Global India Collective is we're taking 10 members of Congress to India in February 2026 in partnership with the Former Members of Congress Association. And that, and I just as a quick aside to Congress, Shashi Tharoor's comments about engaging, um, through Sunny's, I guess, through his donation and support, we were able to create the Congressional Study Group on India, which is a collection of current members of Congress who want to expand their understanding of India. On the day that we announced it, we had 61 members of Congress sign up. 10 of them want, or actually, we have to put them on a waiting list on the number of members who want to go to India through Round Glass's support. I think that's great. And when people go to India and they go through the FMC trip, we are hoping that they actually engage India differently, that it's an authentic visit, that they get to see the diversity of India, they get to see the voices of India, they get to feel it, everything. And that will hopefully develop a stronger understanding versus them sitting in Congress, reading papers, getting all these multiple different viewpoints. As you and I will say, because I know you do a lot of work on the ground in India, you can't understand India until you go to India. And that's what we're hoping to do, facilitate more of that. And then the third bucket that we're working on, and again through the generous support of the Round Glass Foundation, the Global India Collective is trying to find more and more ways for Indian Americans to engage in public service, and whether that's through internships in state capitals and city councils. It doesn't always have to be Washington. Civil engagement is civil engagement, right? And so we're going to try to find different ways for people, young Indian Americans, to engage in that. We're going to try to create an ecosystem that encourages members of our diaspora to run for office. Running for office is good for our diaspora and creating an understanding of our diaspora, but we also think it's good for U.S. politics to have members of our community serving in key positions. So those are primarily the three buckets that we're working on in order to develop a greater understanding of India, to develop a much more authentic understanding of India, but to also create a stronger bond, cultural bond between the two countries.
So, to conclude, I did want to ask you what inspires you to stay engaged in this work.
Well, it's a great question. I actually have not even really thought about that until you just asked it. Um, what inspires me to do this work is that I I love our community. I love our diaspora. I love people like you, and 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 I've been doing this for a long time, and this is not something working for the diaspora, working for whether it's equal representation, key issues, U.S. India relations. It's not something that can be done in 1 quarter, 2 quarters, 3 quarters, 4 quarters. You have to be committed to it, just like you. I'm going to ask you the same question because I also admire all the work that you do, and you also have been doing it for a long time. I think what drives me is really I do believe in it. I do believe in our diaspora. I do believe in what our community represents. I do believe in a strong U.S. India relationship. I'm glad and honored to always meet people like Sunny and you and others who are also committed to it, and creating this community of advocates who are fighting in our own little ways to ensure that we are understood, that our community is understood. And I would rather have people, Sital, to be frank, have people like me, you, and Sunny define what is our diaspora versus people outside of our diaspora defining who we are, which you can have, and that tendency to happens in the United States. But I am curious, I'm a fan of your work. I'm a fan of what you do. What drives you?
Well, thank you, Kapil. I appreciate your generous comments. I think that you and I are unique in certain ways, which is that we've grown up here. I was born in India. I came here when I was 4, so effectively grown up here, yet have a desire to work on issues related to India and to study India. And I think for me, what made that happen is that because of the 4 years I did spend with my grandparents, my parents left me there with them. I became very close to them. And as a result, spent many summers in a small town in the middle of India, alone, without parents, without the 1 week vacation where you get, you don't get the full picture. And so it's 3 months, and I went over the course of many summers, and I felt sort of like an anthropologist, because here I was in America eating, pizza and, tweezing my hair and, doing bad things that my parents would think are bad. And there in India, I just saw, sitting on the ground, eating with my hands, eating the same food, seeing the domestic workers, seeing the culture. And I think that gave me more insights and continued to want to learn more. And I sort of saw the parallel lives of me growing up here versus what I could have been at the time, where there were fewer opportunities for women. There are more now. And then feeling the need to bridge that and try to uplift others who maybe didn't have the same opportunities. And of course, there are more opportunities for the middle class and the elites. There's still, it's a whole different world when we talk about Dalits, or when we talk about people who are less privileged. Even now, is something that I feel compelled to work on.
That is actually what I love about the Global India Collective. You will not see the Global India Collective and Round Glass Foundation focus on differences. Won't do it. We're just going to focus on what brings us together. And I think if we can amplify that message, it will bring people together, and it will have side benefits that we can't even see today. So that's what gets me excited about Round Glass, is focusing on those commonalities.
It's beautiful. Well, thank you. I think, it's just a small drop in the bucket. I think there's a lot more to do and figure out, and having many more people on the table to eventually get that kind of consensus, make our differences less visible and our similarities more visible, is going to require a lot of work. I don't know that that we're even having that conversation. I think starting to have that conversation is going to be is the first step.
Well, we have to start. You just nailed it.
Yeah.
If we don't try, then there's a bunch of what ifs, and I'd rather not have the what ifs.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Kapil, for being here, for taking your time, and it was so fun to talk to you.
Same. Likewise. Have an awesome day.
Thank you. Here's my take. Although I don't agree with Shashi Tharoor's view that we have a moral obligation as Indian Americans to lobby on behalf of India within our government, what his view has done is it's allowed us to put the mirror on ourselves, and it's given us insight on some of the important concerns within our community. Our civic energy is spread across organizations with different missions. What we need is a coordinated, inclusive, government-neutral effort that channels our strengths, voices, and talents into meaningful visibility and influence in Washington. And I hope our listeners will start this conversation and start working towards this goal. If you enjoyed this episode of The Hyphen, please subscribe to our podcast and you'll be notified when we release future episodes. And thank you to our producers, Ashini Jagtiani and Shannon Young, as well as Social Sherpa. We appreciate the collaboration we have with the India Abroad.